Good evening. You're either watching or listening to Redwood Wonk. I'm with David Frank. My name is Eric Kirk. We are talking national political news of the day, and we will start with the biggest story of the election of of this current news cycle, and that is the arguably lackluster vice presidential debate last night. But maybe that's not such a bad thing. It was also a civil debate, a very civil debate in which they talked about issues, very few barbs. They shook hands at the beginning and the end, didn't have to be forced on anybody. And there actually were a few what could appear to be human moments in that. So we're going to talk about that, and I want to hand it off to Dave. But first, I want to just point out my take on it. I thought that Vance was actually kind of winning for maybe the first half. I mean, the bar was low. All he had to do was not look insane and basically defeat the images of him. And he is also a lawyer. He knows how to prep for a debate. Walz was nervous. I don't think that necessarily hurts him because he's got this "I'm an ordinary guy, school teacher." Kind of thing going, and I think everybody relates to him being nervous. So he got kind of a slow start. Didn't take advantage of a few opportunities that we can get into, but by the end, I would say that I think Vance it might have been even between them in the second half, and then Vance made the mistake. Well, maybe not the mistake, but he's repeating the same line that most Republican leaders have been pushing over the past 4 years when pressed, did Biden win the election? And they don't answer the question. And he didn't answer the question. Well, we need to look forward. Biden is the president. That's not an answer to the question. We all know Biden is the president. We saw him get sworn in. The question is, did he win the election? And they don't answer it. I mean, from weeks after when they were being asked the question to now, they don't answer the question. Vance didn't answer it. Walz, probably his best moment of the debate, says that is a very damning non-answer. And that is what the news was discussing, maybe not Fox, but almost every other news department, as the big problem for the campaign. And then in CBS, afterwards, that's where the debate was hosted, by the way, was CBS. They afterwards pointed out or was interviewing Senator Tom Cotton, Republican, very conservative, and they asked him the question, and he couldn't answer it. I mean, because to answer that Biden won the election would get you in a lot of trouble with Trump and his base. It just is a reflection as to the iron death grip that Trump has on the party right now, and that's a problem. And Vance was doing pretty well, very well up until that point. I'll caveat there were a few mistakes, and Walz made a few mistakes too. I mean, he also denied or refused to answer whether or not climate change is a hoax. But Walz didn't take advantage of that. Lastly, I'm just going to mention a kind of an interesting moment where I think Vance made his first big mistake. And that was when he was fact-checked. Now, by the agreed upon rules, the moderators weren't supposed to fact-check, but he kept repeating the lie that the Haitian immigrants in Springfield are illegal. That is a very dangerous lie. That could become a lethal lie because there are, the claims, as we know, about eating cats and dogs, which really wasn't prominent last night, and committing crimes. They keep doubling down on this is a problem of illegal immigration, and that's dangerous. And the one of the two women said, sorry, we're going to correct you on that. They are not illegal. They're there legally. And that's when Vance spoke up with probably his most self-righteous moment, said, well, you're breaking the rules. You weren't supposed to fact check, and then went on a rant. Big mistake, because by emphasizing that you were just fact checked is to underscore the fact that you just told a lie. So and a serious one. I don't think that would have hurt him so much, but the non-answering and the fact that took place so late in the debate, I think was a big mistake. Now Walz kind of fumbled the ball. I don't know what he could do. He told in 2018 he claimed that he was in Hong Kong when Tiananmen Square happened. It turns out he wasn't. He was in Nebraska at the time and did not go to China, Hong Kong or China, until August of that year. And he kind of fumbled that and said, "I'm a knucklehead." I don't know. Maybe he didn't. He owned it, and maybe that played well. Dave, a lot more to talk about.
Yeah, there really is a lot. I think you set the stage well. Generally speaking, I think I heard you attribute that Vance was holding his own in a way that seemed positive right up from the beginning, as Walz got a slower start. Overall, I think that we could call that a cordial vibe between them. They were polite. They kept saying, they were in a sense referencing some amorphous common values and saying like disagreeing on policy differences, but saying, yeah, I really think that what you said, you made some good points. So actually that was pretty surprising. It went very smoothly. Like you said, there were a couple flaws here and there, which we could talk about, but it changed pretty dramatically as it got farther along. And when they talked about reproductive rights, when they talked about healthcare, Affordable Care Act, that kind of, there was a lot more, you could see Walz was coming into his own there with some solid data, policy perspective, and approachable common sense ways to differentiate the two camps. But then, like you mentioned, I think at the end there, that last topic before the closing comments, which was about the peaceful transfer of power, that's really the highlight for Walz. And I think all things being equal, that's the differentiator. And from my perspective, that's how Walz comes out ahead. But as I mentioned last week, they both I believe after watching, and I think that they both accomplished what they set out to accomplish. Vance was not off-putting. He wasn't particularly weird in any way.
Didn't insult.
There was no real insults to speak of. Definitely, he referenced compassion, empathy, kindness many times. I think he really checked the boxes. I heard on Fox, they were obviously very much, it was like a pep rally, so to speak. But to be fair, the same thing on MSNBC. That's how they treated Walz's performance. It was very much like a pep rally. So in terms of, I guess, the vibes and the overall, did they set out what they accomplished to set out? I already described Vance, but to speak to Walz, I think he also his camp had publicly stated that he's not particularly a good debater and he's not really comfortable, and they lowered the bar, and that was probably effective because he was a little bit out of his element until he got rolling, and then he kind of rolled up his sleeves and was a little bit more accurate. So that's my general take on this. Yeah. One thing which I think is worth mentioning is, as a policy person, knowing that the answers that were coming out of Vance's mouth in many cases were completely detached from reality. So for example, and I'm just going to use this as one example, and then I'll throw it back to you. I consider this kind of a fatal flaw for people that care about policy. Vance was asked, how do you protect people with pre-existing conditions if you're going to abolish the Affordable Care Act? What's your plan? And he said, oh, well, there's already a law for that. And the law for that is the Affordable Care Act. But then he doubled down and he went on this diatribe about how Trump protected health care, and during the Trump administration, all these great things that he did to shore up the health care in the country. But people know that his during the Trump administration, they took it all the way to the Supreme Court trying to have it shot down, and that they lost. And then they tried, multiple bills. I heard 60. I don't know if it was actually 60 times, but they tried many different ways to shoot it down. And it was a Republican, John McCain, who actually saved it. And so Walz did a really good job because he knows this inside and out. But I think it kind of if you didn't already know all the context, Walsh wasn't that great at explaining what he was trying to say. I think in many cases he was way more accurate and spot on with his what he had to say about policy, but it wasn't entire, like, you had to know what he was talking about to really get it in many cases.
That's right.
I'll toss it back to you, see if there are any policy elements that stand out on your end. Just kind of go back and
Well,
forth a little more.
I mean, where I thought Vance was winning was right out of the gate on the first question about, would you support Israel, striking Lebanon or Iran? And Walls didn't come up with a real clear answer to that. He started repeating a bunch of talking points that are essential, but you got to be a wonk, as you said, to really understand what he was trying to say. And Vance came out and said, "Hey, that's up to Israel. It's their country that they're defending. They need to do that. That is you may agree or disagree with it, but that is a clear-cut answer." I thought Walls missed a few opportunities, and that's including the one where the moderators got frustrated and fact-checked him, on the Haitian immigrants and the rest. And he didn't come back, and even with healthcare, although I thought he did really well in healthcare, but he didn't come back and said, yes, it's existing law. That's Obamacare. No kidding.
Yeah.
And I don't think a lot of people are buying the idea that Vance was trying to sell on that Trump was good for Obamacare. If you like Obamacare, you should have Trump because he tried to kill it. But the Republicans in Congress, when he had both branches of Congress in there, couldn't bring themselves after 60 attempts to do it, or motions or bills while Obama was still president. All of a sudden, they had the power to do it, but they knew that would have created chaos, which would have hurt them in their future election chances, and they didn't do it. And then started up again later, right? I mean, I think Walz could have done a little bit better, but he's not an attacker, especially when in person. I think if he had gone on the attack too much, it would have been contrary to the nature of who he is. And that would have hurt him, because you got to be, that what they tell us as lawyers is, don't emulate somebody else's style. You got to find your own voice and be who you are. And I think that's who Waltz was. I mean, there was a really human moment between them after Waltz said he was a knucklehead and he called himself a knucklehead. And that's going to be repeated by comedians. He turned to Vance and said, "Yeah, we both have some problems with saying things that are out of whack." And Vance laughed and nodded. I mean, it was an actual moment because both of them get themselves into trouble sometimes. And then Jimmy Kimmel last night, watch his opening monologue, repeated every single time them saying, "I agree" with the other one. And it was like about a dozen times before there was a really funny skit about Vance going back into a donut shop. If you get onto YouTube, look up Jimmy Kimmel's show for last night. It's pretty funny all the way around. But anyway, technically speaking, Waltz did, but people don't come away remembering that many independent points unless the media is going to repeat them. And the topic of discussion on everything except Fox News was his non-answer to whether Biden won, and that is what is going to impact undecided voters, or at least some of them. The most, that was the takeaway, the big takeaway. Other than they were nice, everybody liked it. The snap polls had them about even, maybe with Vance even with a 1 or 2 point advantage, but 17 to 25% saying it was a tie, and everybody's saying, "Wow, that was a civil debate. I didn't know those happened." You got young people that haven't seen that, right? The last time there were civil debates. Anyways, a lot to talk about, but we've only got a couple of minutes left. I'm going to let you close it out.
All right, cool. Thanks. I think it's important, as you said, I'm just going to hammer down on this a little bit about that last question before closing remarks. In general, the moderators were tightly packaging their questions with facts and really trying to pin down the answer and steer the direction of the answer. So, for example, in that question, it was, basically asking the alternative elector scheme that was deemed illegal and the election results that were the attempts to block and overturn that.
Yeah.
What do you say to that? Would because apparently, Vance has been picked to be this candidate because he said he would do what Pence didn't do.
Yeah.
So instead of answering that question, he basically said the problems of 2020 need to be addressed peacefully. And he
Right.
pivoted to censorship is the real threat to democracy. So that gave him something to say and talk about. Misinformation, disinformation campaigns during COVID. There's a conservative backlash to that. So he kind of latched onto that. But more importantly, Walz, I think that he made his finest comments in a folksy way that will resonate probably through the end of the election. I think it may even be determinative in a sense in a lot of people's minds who are independent minded or are kind of on the fence. He said democracy is bigger than winning an election.
Yeah.
And he's basically saying that like this is laying the groundwork for people that disagree if Trump loses for violence, and that a peaceful transfer of power is necessary for democracy. And so it went back to Vance. Vance, I guess, felt the need to respond, and he just went back to censorship. Oh, actually, no. The moderators said, like, to be clear, what do you say? And he said, hey, he equated this threat to censorship again. And that's when Walt said, that's a damning non-answer. You can't yell fire in a crowded theater. And he hammered home, where's the firewall with Trump if he knows he can get away with anything? And he basically said that the citizens, the voters are the ones. There's no firewall here with Vance. The voters are the firewall. And I think that really resonated.
I, Richard Billhouse Nixon, do solemnly swear.
I, Gerald R. Ford, do solemnly swear.
I, Jimmy Carter, do solemnly swear.
I, Ronald Reagan, do solemnly swear.
I, George Herbert Walker Bush, do solemnly swear.
I, William Jefferson Clinton, do solemnly swear.
I, George Walker Bush, do solemnly swear.
I, Barack Hussein Obama, do solemnly swear.
I, Donald John Trump, do solemnly swear.
I, Joseph Robinette Biden Jr., do solemnly swear. So help me God.
Okay, next topic. According to the polls, Trump had a huge advantage in the polls in terms of when they ask about various issues, the border and the economy. And Harris, over the past few weeks, has been making gains on it. She's still behind in terms of whether Trump would be better for the economy, but only 5 points behind. When it was Biden, I think it was like 20 or 30 points. And she has come from behind on that. The perception of her as being a positive economic force has improved. Not perfect, but I think it's for a couple of reasons. One thing is her messaging, how she handled the first debate, and the questions about it in the first debate. But probably the biggest reason is the fact that the economy is actually improving. Now, I think it was is it Matt Luntz, the former Republican pollster who talks on CNN. Anyway,
Frank Luntz.
Frank Luntz. He says, people don't care about the economy. They care about prices, right? And so you've got to have that. Well, report today is that inflation is down, a key figure down to 2.2%, lower than expected. Report today is that the private sector jobs done reported by ADL increased up by 143,000 in September, which is really good. We'll see the full jobs report on Friday when it reports, including government jobs and other things. But it looks like inflation is coming down. Interest rates are coming down. No fault or credit to any president, because that's decided by the Fed, which is basically its own branch of government. So you got the interest rates coming down, inflation, and jobs doing pretty well. It may just be that things are better for people. Prices have fallen, and maybe that's being reflected. Well, it must be who's in office. Even when Trump tries to take credit of all the good stuff while blaming all the bad stuff on on that. And I also think that they kind of the Democrats have been good at reminding people that the economy did well by under Trump for 3 years. Whether that was Obama or Trump, or the big spending bill that was passed in 2017, you can debate, but we all remember, at least most people should remember, that the economy collapsed with the pandemic. And if you argue that it was Trump's mismanagement of it, that maybe that's kind of resonating too now that the economy is even improving. Whether or not it has anything to do with what any president does, it's my contention that presidents have a small impact on the economy one way or another, but that's a whole other story.
So and again, thank you for the setup. I appreciate it. I think I agree with everything that you said. The key to me here on this, like basically, why is she gaining support when it was Biden as the candidate, Trump had an immense margin. So it was like over 14 points spread of who do you think would do a better job on the economy. And I think that was the sort of the incumbent blame, like you said, that even though incumbents have very little impact on overall the macroeconomic issues that end up trickling down into how we feel about the economy, there's still people need to blame somebody, and so the messaging is important, and even policy proposals, people need to think and see evidence that people are making attempts to help them. Now that said, I think that the impact of COVID itself and the economy being closed, and also the response to COVID, the creation of $7 trillion in debt under Trump and another $7 trillion under Biden, that combined impact was going to inevitably lead to inflation, on top of the other things that happened, like supply chain disruptions and high interest
and pent-up demand.
Yeah, exactly. And the fact rather that the costs themselves ended up going up for people. So all of the elements, and then you combine that with basically corporate opportunism. And so there were a lot of industries like that were called out, like the grocery industry and others. We don't have to name them all, but we all know that when you see something on the news, oil goes up when something happens on the news. Well, when the whole world economy, actually, I remember at one point oil was actually negative. They couldn't deliver it. There was no place to bring it. So the fact that somehow within a very short period of time there was a massive glut, but then there was scarcity. But anyway,
real quickly, the price of gas, you'll see all these memes about the price of gas in 2020. Well, nobody was driving anywhere. So, of course, the price of gas was going to be at its lowest in decades in terms of real dollars. So, that's always a part they left out. But anyway.
So I mean, what I'll say is that we're talking about Harris's, her approval increasing. It's because she's focused, her team is focused like a laser beam on this concept of the opportunity economy. And so if they know that nearly 80% of people, I think 76% in this one poll, CBS News poll just from 2 months ago, say that their number one problem is inflation. And that's the number one thing that they're going to use, when choosing a president. Well, it turns out that inflation's been declining for a while now, and it's reached pretty, you said as of today, even lower than the recent 2.5. I think you mentioned 2.2. I hadn't heard that yet. It's a very busy day, but like that's the target. The target is 2%. That's considered like basically normal growth. Yeah. And they've even talked about changing it to 2 to 3%. But rather than get super wonky on the details right now and the stats and the percentages, the idea is that inflation was so high for so long during COVID and its aftermath, and prices don't go down. When the inflation is 2%, the prices are still going up. So not only has it been the real cost and the real economic insecurity felt by families, but it's also that politicization of it from the out party. So the Republicans, Trump, just generally speaking, they've been beating that drum like they've been beating the immigration drum and saying, hey, all these people they're making housing go up, they're taking jobs. So it's that political again, opportunism, which, you could expect people to do that when they're in the out party. But anyway, Harris's response has been to, continuously emphasize the middle class. And it says right on her website, she will make it a top priority to bring down costs and increase economic security for all Americans. So there's no favoritism. There's no targeted programs. It's everyone's going to get an advantage to open a business with a $50,000 tax credit. Everyone's going to get the opportunity to own a home with a 25% or $25,000, credit of some kind to help pay for the down payment on a house. There was other child tax credit, like a $3,000 to $6,000 tax credit. Newborns was 6, children was 3. So they're really addressing a whole bunch of ideas. Anything that Trump says, like, oh, let's have cut taxes or make wages, make tips tax free. Harris said, me too. Like, I'm going to say I support that too. So she's trying to outflank on the Trump side of promoting middle class cost of living increases and improving their economic opportunity and outlook and prospects rather. And I think that's where we're seeing, that's why she's bridged this gap so effectively, so quickly.
I think so too, and success is there now. That one of the interesting things that happened last night, referring back to the vice presidential debate, is Vance blamed every problem on inflation and immigrants. I mean, everything. I mean, just that was the mantra over and over again, because these are the two strongest issues. But the other thing he kept playing is, well, she's been vice president for 3.5 years. Why didn't she make these changes then? Well, what people, if he would remember from his civics class, which I assume he took, the vice president is not in charge of the country. Vice president's job is basically to stack paper clips, attend meetings, and wait for the president to die. That's the vice president's job, and break ties in the Senate. I mean, it's they don't do it. Now she could be part of in there, and they could be arguing, why didn't she influence Biden to pass these things? Well, the fact of the matter is she's a different person, and she's representing. So it may be that somehow she managed to flip the script and turn Trump into the incumbent. I mean, I don't know how she pulled it off. I'm still not understanding it, but she is seen by a lot of voters, not just Democrats, as the agent for change. Republicans are even kind of falling into the trap by saying, well, it's negative change. It's going to make things worse. But what they're doing is they're acknowledging this. So I think that she's getting credit for it, even though the president doesn't have that much influence, and the vice president has zero influence on the economy. But the way it works is, if the economy goes south, the president takes the blame. If the economy improves, the president gets the credit. It's just the way it is. It's not rational, but as you say, people have to blame somebody, and people know when they are better off or worse off. And I noticed that Trump has stopped saying, are you better off, or we're better off than you were 4 years ago, because people are responding. 4 years ago, they were stuffing meat lockers with dead bodies and using them as mass coffins. I mean, you really want to go back to 4 years ago? So it's just, and people were hoarding toilet paper. But he had managed to blame his own policies on liberals, on the Democrats, right? That's what he'd managed to do. And so I think, though, that there are voters that are catching up. Now, I don't have a whole lot of regard for people who are undecided at this point. Whatever you support or don't support, it's pretty clear what each candidate stands for. So I don't know. I'm always wondering and amazed. There's even a funny Saturday Night Live skit about it. Is what are they waiting for? What's going to make them decide? Do they expect to hear something? I think they're just people who kind of enjoy the attention they get, and they do get a lot of attention. All of the focus groups last night looking at the debates. Well, did this sway your opinion? And most of them said no. So there isn't a whole lot of movement, but there is movement in the polls in terms of how they support and what they're supported for. And it looks like the economy is ceasing unless this longshore strike, if that happens, sends us back into inflation and other problems, because that the strikes at that could create supply chain problems. Is that what will each side do about that? Well, Harris would probably have to go march in the lines. I mean, it's just like that. But that's about the one chance they get for that particular October surprise. There's not a whole lot more to say about it. We can go into some of the data, but it's pretty. I mean, there's some concerns about the deficit. And that's always a concern. It just gets bigger, but as a percentage of GDP, which is what economists say is the measure. This is the other thing that I think Vance overdid last night. Why do we believe experts? It was where Walz was saying, they don't all agree for one thing. So, but you got to listen to them. And Vance was like, no, experts bad. I don't think that would have played well with anybody who hasn't made up their mind yet. But again, I don't know if anybody will remember that part.
Yeah, I won't go into the expert thing, but I do get a sense of where you're coming from on that. And the truth is that it's, to a certain extent, you could look at some of the polling. Like there was a recent Harris Guardian study where they interviewed people and they gave 6 Harris economic policies and 6 Trump economic policies, but they didn't say which was attributed to who. And then they said, rank these. What are the most popular? Which ones do you support? And Harris's were 4 out of 5. Number 1 was federal ban on price gouging of food and groceries. Well, economists say that's not necessarily a good thing to have the price controls, for example. But it was the number 1 response across all groups, and in particular, young people. And that's the largest. Millennials are the single largest voting bloc this election. That's not to say that they're actually going to turn out in numbers commensurate with their potential voting power. But think about it. If you're a young person and as you're trying to, advance your career, think about childcare, housing, jobs, you're growing up in a very difficult time. And so that's
some of whom have never seen inflation before.
Correct.
I mean,
yeah.
I have the experience of it from the 1970s. There was a little bit of it in the 1980s, but this is a new thing. How could prices go this high so quickly?
Yeah. So people feel the way they feel based on prices, based on lack of opportunity. But unemployment is near, it's at a relative low. 4.2% was the last I looked. And so people are actually concerned, highly concerned. It's like 70+% of people in this Harris survey said that they don't feel positive effects of the good economic news. And so they, over half think that we are that inflation's going up. Nearly half, almost exactly half, think that we're experiencing a recession. Neither of which is true. But when people look in the mirror and they say, well, how do I feel about my own personal situation? More than half have a positive preference on that. So really, it's like this tale of two cities. 3/4 say, oh my God, if you look around, everything's terrible. But when they look in the mirror, about half people say things are all right. So that can explain a little bit of the loosening of the reins. That the Bidenomics, all those trillions of dollars, hundreds of billions of dollars of investments and spending, it didn't all go to places where people really saw those tangible benefits. Yeah. But to hear Harris say, we're going to be making these expenditures in childcare and housing and job creation, things like stimulating small businesses. That's like I said, that's resonating, and we continue to see her benefit, despite how economists may disagree that they're really going to be helpful.
I love those pink signs. Women for Trump. I love the signs behind me. Blacks for Trump. I like those signs. Blacks for Trump. You watch. You watch. Those signs are great. Thank you.
All right, last segment. There's a lot of discussion about people of color, particularly black male voters, that are moving towards Trump. Now, I want to have a caveat here. I have been reading and hearing about the great realignment of the black vote since the 1980s. Every time they say, "Oh, the Democrats are losing black voters," and they're losing Latino voters and the like. Now, in 2020, we discussed on this very show that that Trump, according to the exit polls, had made gains with every group except working class whites and suburban women, which is mostly white women. And whereas Biden had picked up 13% of that in the Rust Belt. But every group, I believe the black vote went from 8% for Trump in 2016 to 12% in 2020. Some of these numbers were called into question by later studies. Maybe it wasn't that dramatic. And black women, he didn't gain at all, according to all of the studies. But there does seem to be some movement of black men, and Trump doesn't have to win the black vote to win the election. He just has to cut into the Democratic support of that vote. Are the and the biggest changes, and then we see Latino votes, particularly in Texas. They tend to be socially conservative, and certain communities of color have always been socially conservative. The black vote, according to polls, only switched in terms of having a plurality favoring abortion rights, as opposed to it just about 15 or 20 years ago, depending on what poll you use. It really started to change in around 2008, because in these communities, unlike the white communities, which are increasingly secular, there are religious Baptists, particularly in black communities, Catholic and Latino communities. So Trump picked up in black votes, in Latino votes, in Asian votes, not Native American votes, but that's a whole other story, but also Jewish votes and LGBTQ votes, not by a huge amount, but measurably. And was this people changing their mind who had supported, or are new voters being brought in that were weren't part of the equation before? And the truth is that within the black community, the most Trump support in the polling comes from the 18 to 30-year-olds. That it's kind of reverse. With white people, the older you are, the more likely you are to vote Republican or conservative. But right now, there is a young group of black voters that are not really identifying with Democrats, and there are few of them registering that way. Of course, there are several states, including ours, where it really doesn't matter how you're registered. But the fact of the matter is, they're breaking away, and there's a lot of reasons that are raised, including that the machismo factor, the patriarchy. Affects men in all cultures. Already have certain white voters that way, and particularly strong in the black community, according to some people who study it, maybe picking up for those reasons. But there's another theory that I read last week, which kind of inspired this, and that is that the anti-racist left, the movements that we've created, have sort of created this ideology that's distant from the civil rights movement. They don't identify with the civil rights movement like older people. It's ancient history to them. And there are people who say, for instance, that things are worse, that it had zero effect. Martin Luther King had zero effect, and things are worse for black people. Look at all the shootings of black men. Now, there's a problem with that argument, is because we see it more on YouTube because people have cameras now. They didn't carry cameras around with them in the 1970s and 80s. And there are actually studies that show that the killing of black men actually have decreased since the 70s and 80s. And there's a lot of reasons why. The police killings overall increased into the 1990s because more white men were being killed. That doesn't mean that police forces were becoming less racist or anything like that. There's complicated reasons for that. I want to toss it off to you, but these are reasons why it may be, particularly within the youth, that people of color, not in huge numbers, but in measurable numbers, are willing to vote for Trump, even though their politics may not match what he says.
Yeah, so I mean, this is a complicated issue. And I actually we did a whole like 1 hour show once on the kind of the tiny slices that you could do with both political parties, and as you look at distinct groups, they've got patterns, and so it's very complicated. But I think, generally speaking, it's true that Trump's support over the last 4 years has increased with male black voters. And not so much with female black voters. So I would say there, the polling, and it's a big increase too. Just this one poll, we could do a morning consult, and we've looked at a bunch, but it went from like 12 percentage points supporting him. 9 percentage points supporting him. That went, which was the average over most of our lives. I think it's about 90% of black people are voting for Democrats. So anything that deviates from that is you become aware. You take a look. Well, he's up to like 21%. A recent poll with black men, and then young black men, it's even more. And then when you go to conservative black folks, it's up to 44%. So the polling is reflective of some cultural phenomena that's very real. And so like I said, you and I have looked at a few different sources together, and they all have different opinions. But I mean, generally speaking, there are issues at play over the last 4 years that have significantly highlighted that people are dissatisfied with the party in power. They're dissatisfied with either the economic prospects under this party in power, or maybe the cultural decisions, the cultural lack of a better way to say it, those issues that Republicans harp on, that they'll repeatedly say things like DEI or structural racism or critical race theory, like as Republicans are saying, like, these things should not be as important in society through education, through other ways of socialization. Republicans are pointing to those things and hyping them up, and there are it's moved 20+%, 24% more conservative black people have shifted.
Sure.
So now, so it went from 24 to 44. That's 20% shift.
These are polls, by the way. We have to,
totally
caution. We don't know what's actually going to happen on election day, but these are
absolutely.
Yeah.
And so anyway, we talked a lot about the black population in America, but I think the Latino population is extremely different. The polling is different, the history is different. I'll just say a couple basic things is that currently we're at a place where about 75% of Latinos are voting Democratic. But that means that there's a large percentage of Latinos who are voting or who are expressing their support for Trump. And so the polling, again, not to get super in the weeds, there's lots of polling there. It's just an observation. And again, with young people, it's a lot of young people. So we're talking about people who are saying, like, something needs to change. There's a party in power. And so there's somebody saying, I'm going to do something different. even with Trump's, and again, I'll toss it back to you shortly, but like the cultural things, elements could be, for example, people are saying things like, the average Latino voter is a third generation voter, which means they're consider themselves American. And if Trump is really saying, hey, there's a threat to America's border that's affecting our economy, it's affecting our security, people are attuned to that, whether, it's affecting some people, some percentage of people. There's evangelical Christian element that's a very large percentage of Latinos, a significant portion anyway. So,
Yes.
so enough to make a marginal difference. And then also a lot of Latinos come from places in Latin America where they have experience of threats to democracy. And when they hear the Democratic Party, particularly, the drumbeat of liberal media, not so much necessarily legislators, saying over and over again, we've got this democracy problem, arguably we do, but relatively speaking, if you come from Venezuela, nothing in America is really going to ruffle your feathers too much when it comes to democracy. And I don't speak for all Venezuelans. I'm just saying, how could we explain marginal differences in BIPOC folks, people of color, like each subset of those people have unique experiences, and we're seeing that reflected in data.
I mean, with regard to Latino, it's really complicated because you've got a bunch of different communities. Cuban Americans vote much different from Mexican Americans, for instance. However, this is, you look at the intangible evidence as opposed to the polling. And if you go to YouTube and look up Latinos for Harris, Miami-Dade, you will see some amazing footage of a caravan of Harris supporters flying Cuban flags, by the way, and people on the sideline cheering them. Probably almost all Cubans, some of them Venezuelan. I have not seen that before, not in Miami-Dade. So is Harris making inroads? Maybe this is why things are close in Florida, and Cook's report might be shifting it to lean Republican rather. It's a big significant difference in Texas. Cook's report just moved the Senate race from what is it, likely Republican to lean Republican. You're right, lean demo. Anyways, it's it is it's a big deal. You look at some of the other groups, though. I think possibly Trump, being himself, may have blown it with any increases in Jewish voters last week when he said it would be Jews' fault if he lost the election. That's not something they like to hear historically. They don't like being blamed for everything, right? I mean, because it leads to violence against them. Typically speaking, 75% of Jews vote for the Democrat. Last time was a little bit lower than that, but not a huge movement. How are they going to vote over the Israeli issue? We don't know. We do know that Muslim voters are. Jill Stein is actually the largest one according to the polls. Will they actually vote that way in November? We don't know. But that's actually a move to the left rather than to the right. So there's so much to say about this, and we don't have a huge amount of time. But it is interesting that the women are different. The other thing that may have really hurt Democrats with working class Black men and people living in the inner cities is the defund the police, ironically, because it came from a Black movement. But they absolutely are saying, hey, we're under siege here. We have crime in our neighborhoods daily. No, don't defund the police. We'll die. I mean, there are people literally saying that, so that may have actually hurt Democrats in 2020 and may continue to do so now, even though that slogan is not being adopted by many. But and the issue of abortion, again, typically speaking, Black voters have always been, but it wasn't a voting issue for them. They voted 90%, I think, 96% for LBJ against Goldwater. Ever since the New Deal, the majority have been there. And I think they probably always will be in the majority, at least for the foreseeable future. But but if Trump can take 17% of the black vote in a key swing state, that can make the difference in states where it's thousands and not tens of thousands in different potential difference.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point too. Here is that somewhere around 44,000 votes across 3 states last time in 2020 would have made the difference for Trump. So the fact that there are millions of people who are on the fence about cultural shifts and just trending a little bit more conservative as they really reflect on which policies better represent their interests, and also who's being responsive to them. I know this sounds like small potatoes, but you mentioned the Black Lives Matter movement. Trump teamed up with, I think, one of the Kardashians and like Kanye, and when he was president, he was saying that he was really in favor of releasing people from prison who weren't in there for violent crime. That resonates with progressives. That resonates across the board. Independents. Also, we have a situation where about 50% of people don't vote at all. And so Trump is actually, his campaign, I heard recently that it was an NPR special, I don't know, maybe back in April or something like that said that Trump's campaign is actually going into neighborhoods where voting turnout is very low and trying to just get people to vote. Yeah. And so it's like micro targeted, and it's like, hey, if you lost this state by 11,000 votes and you go knock on 20 or 30,000 people's door, that could change things. So you could imagine, not that everybody's getting calls for polling. Polling is just representative, and it's got its own internal flaws. But again, we saw that the polling was about, depending on the polls, 3-5% skewed in favor of Democrats because Trump supporters not participating in polling. Yes. You add those two marginal populations together, people sort of trending a little bit more conservative, and people deciding to vote when they wouldn't have voted before. It seems like it's going to be a really close race, despite or maybe in alignment with how close the polling appears.
Eeny, meeny, chili beanie, the spirits are about to speak.
Are they friendly spirits?
Friendly? Just listen.
This brings us to predictions. Dave, what do you have for us?
I'm going to try to keep it short and sweet, and this is about the debate that the vice presidential debate from last evening. I'm going to give you a quote that came from Tim Walz in that debate, where basically speaking about his outlook on policies that may cost money, but that will improve people's lives. And he quoted Matthew. He said, "I don't like to wear my faith on my sleeve, but Matthew 25:40. And I looked it up because I didn't hear exactly what his quote was. So he might have phrased it differently, but it's, and the king will answer them, truly, I tell you, whatever you did for the least of these brothers and sisters of mine, you did for me. And basically that's Walz's way of saying, like, hey, people, if you're even remotely questioning voting, who you're going to vote for, if you're going to vote at all, the policy perspectives putting forward, the policy initiatives, policy proposals being put forward, think about what will improve people's lives. Think about what you heard tonight. Think about what's happening. And the reason I bring this up is because on issue by issue, Walz was saying, I was a governor. He was able to get past, I think it was like 13 progressive policy priorities that Obama tweeted out in a state that's very conservative. It's a 50-50 mixed state. And so the takeaway here is that message resonates, that we invest in the working class, invest in middle class, that all things being equal, that we should find in favor of that approach. So my prediction is that even though vice presidential debates rarely matter at all, that Walz did enough of defense of Harris and defense of that ticket that he did no harm, which will be considered a success. And in fact, I think they might actually still continue to see an uptick in polling popularity numbers in battleground states through the next 5 weeks through the election.
He defended government regulation. When's the last time a Democrat did that openly?
Right.
All right, I'll be real quick here. The polls, there's been a lot of discussion as to whether or not the polls will kind of blow it in terms of Trump support, because a lot of Trump people don't participate in polls, and they messed it up in 2016 and also 2020. Will they do it again? Well, Rasmussen's people actually, and that's a Republican polling firm, by the way, actually sounded an alarm for Republicans that they may be actually overcounting Trump this time around, maybe trying to overcompensate. Also, what we've been referring to as the Dobbs effect and the unusual registrations of young people. It may very well be. I'm going to predict that, even though I don't know, but I'm predicting that whatever the outcome, Trump may win the election, but whatever the outcome, the polls are going to be shown to have overcounted Trump votes and undercounted Harris's. We'll find out if this happens in a little over a month. But until next time, stay informed and stay engaged.